I give her space. When she's stressing, out from work, the kids are PMSing. Send her text messages just to check in, like I'm thinking of you, how's your day been? She wanna stay in when it's nighttime.
All right. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everybody. These headphones aren't the greatest, but we're gonna work through it. So I have with me Adrian Street, the creative director of Malevolent Mermaids.
Yes.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Well, Malevolent Mermaids, we are an entertainment group that is dedicated to empowerment, and then also we have a huge base in helping bring about the actual lore around mermaids. So I started what I do as Cleona, the mermaid, because of the fact that I love mermaids, and I love kind of like the deadly mythologies that are associated with those things. And it's kind of become this thing where mermaids are friendly, and people are like, oh, look at the pretty mermaids, let's go play with the pretty mermaids. But if you look at the actual lore around mermaids, they were warnings, they were bad omens, they weren't something that you were looking for. You wanted to kind of stay away from them.
Right. So basically, that like overly girly stigma that's associated, you kind of want to bring it back to the real, like
yeah. So I just
women can be deadly.
Exactly. So and it's not like, so one of the things that I've kind of like weaved into this is also this kind of intersectional feminist aspect of it, because we don't eat anybody who is a good person, basically. If you're a consent violator, if you are a misogynist, if you're racist, if you're a bigot, those are the people that the mermaids that we portray target as well.
Right.
So,
right on.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a social justice through mermaids.
Yeah, it's a satire, kind of. It's
nice.
A satire of kind of like saying, hey, this is something that we do, and it's become something that I know a lot of women that I've come across that have gotten a lot of empowerment from.
Right.
And it's also about building up the children and helping them realize that they can achieve their dreams as
right.
well. So
yeah. I know that's one of the things I mentioned to you when I initially asked you to come on, is that I love that you're providing that ulterior, goal or aspiration to have, instead of just, you know what I mean, like the Cardi B's and out there in the world is like, yeah, you can own your sexuality, but still be
exactly,
respectable and
exactly. It's something that is it's hugely important to me, and it's something that is, I feel like a lot of people gain a lot from. We spent this last weekend at Hexenfest, which is a music festival.
Nice.
And we performed there, and we got to spend the time, like the first day we ended up swimming with the children, and we had severed heads that were the heads of our victims that we had captured and preserved and kept as trophies.
Right.
And we had our bloody hearts that we eat.
Nice.
And the second day we hung out with a bunch of adults, and we sat around and we talked about the lore, and we talked about the stories, and just enjoyed a lot of laughter. And it was something, so it's that kind of like bringing that joy to the downtrodden and helping them find a way to kind of bring back their power.
Right. Nice. That's awesome. Now, I recently had Tom Pressler on here, and I think that's where we initially met, was at the Zombie Walk Burlesque show.
Yeah.
Were you already doing the because I feel like you...
No.
I've kind of...
So I've only been doing this mermaid thing for about a year, and it actually started
It's only been a year?
Yeah,
since I started seeing those pictures?
Yeah,
That's crazy.
It's only been not even a year. I started out with it because some friends I had started going to the Renaissance fairs with my friends who have a mythical creature guild, and they needed a mermaid for their encampment. And so it was this thing that I then did this. I craft a lot, and I went and I was like, okay, how do I make a mermaid tail? I have no idea how to make a mermaid tail.
Right.
15,000 sequins hand sewn onto that tail later,
oh,
over the
goodness.
course of 3 months. And Cleona was born.
Right.
And it was kind of figuring out how to do it in a way that was approachable to the children. So when you look at the pictures, Cleona, she's all about the glitter. She's all about the sparkle. She's all about the shiny things.
Right, right.
And it makes her really approachable. But I also have my fishing spear that I've acquired that has a severed head hanging from it as well.
So don't get it twisted.
yeah. So it's creating it in a way that it's approachable and it's able to start those conversations. And when I go to the Renaissance fairs, I will hand out little shiny wishing stones to the children. And that's one thing that's really opens up a lot of conversations, because when you're talking about, especially the Irish Fae, you don't want to, there's certain things that you don't do as they'll become offended.
Right,
and one of those things is, hey, don't say thank you. It's offensive for one, and for two, within the lore with the Fae, they can take that as a sign that, oh, now you owe me something for this gift I gave you.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
so it really opens up. So when I hand that to the children, the children go to and the parents go to the children and they go, what do you say? And they say thank you. It opens up that dialogue of, well, did you know this little fact that when you're talking about the Irish Fae, you don't want to say thank you.
Yeah, they're tricky.
They're tricky.
They're tricksters.
Yeah, they're tricksters. Yeah.
I love it. Okay, well, I was going to ask how you got the idea, but that kind of, you answered that a little bit already.
Yeah.
So now there's kind of two aspects of what you do with the mermaids, because you go to the Renaissance fairs and you do that, but you also still perform burlesque.
Yes,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
And October 19th, guys, here at the Whiskey Barrel, she's going to be performing with the Bungalow Bunnies.
Yes.
That sounds exciting.
It's exciting. It's our Halloween show, so expect a lot of blood, expect a lot of kind of the creepier things for the show. We do have fire, so there is some
nice.
fire stuff that happens, and it's a lot of fun. And I actually got into burlesque because when I saw the women on stage, it was incredibly empowering to see them basically owning their sexuality and owning who they are. And Bungalow Bunnies, we are a body positive burlesque troupe, so we have women of all colors and sizes, and we like to bring that diversity, and we all bring different talents, and it's an incredibly supportive group, and I think we put on a pretty good show.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something that is incredibly empowering to do.
Yeah. I agree that performance back at the Zombie Walk was, I think, the only time I've done it. But it was, I enjoyed it. I would, you know, continue to do it. I've just done other things in my life. But, yeah, I think it's, as much as I come off as a prude in some ways, I am very open to, positivity when it's done the right way. Yeah. And I think that's, a tasteful way of doing it.
Yeah.
What are the tickets for that?
So there's no cover.
Oh, wow. A free burlesque show, guys. Come on now.
Yeah, and there's fire. And there's actually, we have, I believe it's the Dirty Pillows playing with us. So there's going to be a band as well.
Okay.
I would have to double check that to make sure. But there is going to be a band as well that will be playing with us. We have a couple guest performers that are coming that are going to be bringing something a little bit different as well. And it's a show that we're really excited about.
Yeah, it sounds like it's going to be a blast.
Yeah.
Then there's also a show on October 27th out in Sonora. So shout out to all my fam bam out in Sonora. Go check her out at the All Hallows Fantasy Fair.
Yeah.
And where is that going to be at?
So that's at the Sonora Fairgrounds.
Sonora Fairgrounds.
And the All Hallows is actually kind of the where I first brought Cleona out to play.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
And it was the first time that I actually showed up in a mermaid costume and got to be able to do that. And I didn't realize it would be such a life-changing thing that would start becoming this all-consuming, like, this is really important to me. It's really important to me, and it's the message that it delivers is really important to me. So I'm really excited about that and being able to go back to where she was born, basically.
Nice. Yeah, I haven't been to their Renaissance Fair, but I've been to their Celtic Fair a couple times.
Yeah, so and the All Hallows Fair is actually more of a Halloween themed fair, so it's not and they have the Celtic Fair and then the Halloween themed fair in Sonora. So it's a fantasy fair.
Right on. Going back to the lore, because I know that's a big aspect of it for you.
Yeah.
You're telling me about this database that's collected all over.
Yeah. So there is a database, Duchas, DUCHAS.IE, and it's a database of collections of folklore that basically, prior to World War II in the 1930s, they wanted to make sure that they gathered the folklore, because the Irish are very verbal, that everything gets transferred, like they're verbal storytellers. So they wanted to collect those stories. So they went out into the communities and they talked to individual people about these stories that they know. And so they wrote down these stories, and there's thousands upon thousands upon thousands of these stories. But what they've started doing on this website is they've uploaded pictures of all of the pages, because they're handwritten.
Right.
And they're starting to transcribe them, and it's become a searchable database.
Nice.
So you can go out there and you can type in different mythology terms or creatures, and you can do a search and find different stories about them. And with the mermaids, there's about 300 over 300 stories out there about mermaids, of different sightings and stories that have been passed down through the generations, and stories about different landmarks on within Ireland that are associated with mermaids.
Right. You were mentioning earlier as well that it's not just Ireland, it's kind of like a global,
absolutely,
maybe not necessarily mermaids, but that similar type of...
Exactly. So for example, one of my favorite stories is about the Rusalkas in the Slavic traditions. They are women, the spirits of women who have basically been wronged and drowned as a result of that wronging, and their spirits basically inhabit the rivers and the lakes, and they actually drown men who are then abusive, because that's how they
get their revenge.
That's how they get their revenge, and that's their way of kind of claiming back their power after they've been wronged to the point where they've basically lost their life and have been changed into this mythological creature.
Right.
So that's one example of them. There are many other examples all over the world as well of the different types of mermaids. And they're not necessarily called mermaids. They all have their own different names. And they may come in different forms as well. But they're basically women type creatures associated with water who are known for vengeance.
Right. Now, where would a siren fall?
Sirens are more of a Greek mythology. And there's a lot of crossover, and when I'm playing Cleona, people often go, oh, she's more of a siren and not more of a mermaid because of the luring sailors to their doom. But there's a lot of crossover within those mythologies as well about luring sailors to their doom and singing and that kind of thing.
So would it kind of be like the Greek version?
Yeah, the Greek version.
Okay.
Yeah, so it would be the Greek version. There are actually some physical differences as well to the types, like to what they look like. and because mermaids, they have the fish tails, and sirens, they're a bit different. So.
Okay, they're more like
Yeah.
They're less human.
Yeah, they're less human, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I've actually looked at the siren lore. I've been kind of focusing up in the Irish lore at the moment and digging into that.
So, do you think you're going to stick with the
No,
Irish lore?
no.
Or is it just...
It's taking one small piece of this research at a time because there's so much information out there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much information available, and it's also really hard to find that information if you don't know where you're looking, because you can just do a general search on the internet and come up with websites, but if they don't have proper sources, it could just be made up.
Right.
So one of my other hats that I wear is with an Irish polytheist priesthood, the Coracata Bodwa, and as a result of my work with that, I've learned how to kind of research these things so that you get that sound academical basis, so that you're actually getting the actual history and not something that has been made up and just put onto the internet.
Right.
And with the Irish history, it's easier for me to start there because I know the sources and I know where to go to find that information, whereas with some of the others, it's not quite as solid. With the Irish, I know the databases where they have the translations of the mythologies. I know the databases where they have the mermaid stories, and there's 300 stories. It's taken me a bit to get through them.
Right, yeah.
Especially when I'm creating, when I'm actually tracking the different trends within these stories as well. So that I can, give some solid data. Hey, so these stories where the mermaid is singing, and then the man comes in and they either have a cap, a cloak, or their skin, and the man takes that, and then they can't go back to the sea without it. So they follow the man home, and they end up marrying the man. Eventually, they will find it. Either they find it while they're cleaning, or the children will find it and bring it to the mom. There are a few occasions where they do find it outside of those two kind of themes. But the man is away at the time that they find it is always kind of the thing. And so they find their skin, their tail, cap, and they return to the sea. And just kind of looking at how many of those stories are where the children find it and bring it to their mom. How many of those stories are where they find it while they're cleaning. And just kind of tracking and trending that information. And how many of the stories do the children get to go with the mom?
That's what I was wondering.
Yeah. So they don't always get to go with the mom, which is kind of interesting because rarely do they ever just get left behind. Most of the times in the stories that I've read so far, they get turned into rocks, or they'll go into this. So she can't take them with them, so she turns them into rocks, and then they're forever these rocks that are associated with these stories of these women and these children.
Right.
And a lot of times sometimes they'll go back to the sea with her. There was one story that I read where the mom told the children to meet her at a specific place at a specific time every morning so she could come visit them. So the mermaid would come and visit them, and the father would try to catch her, and she never got caught again. And
that's an interesting story, especially for the time that it was written, when you think of women not really having these choices and whatnot.
Exactly.
So I see why, they could be very empowering for...
and it's people. Interesting. So the thing about myths is they have so many different layers of the human experience kind of wrapped up in them.
Right,
So the myths are created kind of through the lens of these... of the people who were living in that time and their perception. So it's really important to look at that perception and realize, hey, there's I have transgender friends who they see this as they find their skin and they become the person that they're supposed to be, and they're so there's that layer of it. My own personal layer is that these women have found the way back home. So they might have gotten distracted, and who knows, they may have been in abusive situations and they got away.
Right.
There's so many different types of layers that can be folded into those stories that people can relate to.
Oh yeah, I'm definitely, I can see a myriad of reasons why somebody could relate to that type of scenario. So is this like, where would you be able to take Cleona?
Cleona, yeah.
Like, are you satisfied doing fairs and burlesque? Is it something that you actually want to teach a whole class on eventually?
So there's a couple things that are in the works, like kind of behind the scenes that, so a lot of this research that I've started doing within the last couple of weeks to month have been kind of like focused. It started out as like kind of this general thing, and like I kind of got some sources and some information, and it was really hard to find the information that I had because of the fact that there's not anything that kind of like is a like compendium of that. So I'm basically in the research phase of creating a book about deadly water monsters is kind of like the theme that I'm just kind of, that's not what it's going to end up being, but I want to make sure that I'm able to tell these stories in a way that honors the cultures that they come from, and as well as make sure that I'm not putting my own perceptions into things well. So eventually, like in about a year and a half is my goal to have that book kind of put together, because it's the resource that I needed when I started this character and wanted to be able to like just like, oh, can I just read a book and have this information here instead of doing all this research and all this digging. There's not really something out there that is easily
has compiled all of the pieces
that I for myself have been looking for, and compiled the pieces that I'm realizing that so many people are kind of hungry for as well. It's interesting when I start having these conversations with people. They're like, oh, mermaids aren't friendly. They're not these like pretty, just kind of.
They're not Ariel.
Exactly. So there's that aspect of it. And then there's also the entertainment aspect. So I've been over the last 6 or 7 months brainstorming kind of like a series of comedy type videos to create, and as soon as I am able to like get those kind of like finalized and find the right people to work with to create these comedy videos, it will partly be part of that. So I know that I have a lot of people who have come up to me, and I do this thing called Mermaid on Tinder. I basically go on Tinder and I put on my profile that I don't like take it seriously at all, and like that, like, and there's actually a line on my profile that says misogynists will be eaten. So it's kind of, I started it because I was sick and I was bored and I wanted to see what would happen if a mermaid went on Tinder. And it started this whole entire thing where I order my dinner off of Tinder because I don't have to actually go hunting. They just show up to my door.
Nice.
So, but it's also like, goes a little bit deeper for me than that, because it also kind of brings out like what the online dating world is like. And it's kind of this thing where it's like taking back our power, because women get solicited just right off the bat without like any conversation, without getting to know you. They're like, oh, you're hot, do you want to come home with me, kind of thing. And that's putting it nicely, with some of the things that that
Guys
show
say,
up.
yeah.
And it's basically become this thing where it's like, all right, you're gonna talk to me that way. I'm gonna eat you. No, really, I will eat you. Do you not know these stories? And I use those, like, I block out the person who sent them to me because anonymity, and I don't want to, like,
put them in danger.
Yeah. But it's like, so I put these screenshots up to show people that this is what we deal with. And I think it's really important, especially with the way that the world is, that people realize that, hey, we're getting loud, we're getting angry, we need we're finding our voice because we're not okay with this treatment. It's not something that we deserve.
Luckily, I got out of the online dating world before Tinder got big, or was even really a thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, because when I first heard about it, I was like, so you just look at their picture and swipe? Like, that's not going to create any problems.
Right.
But yeah, that concept is, I can see you doing a lot with that.
Yeah.
That's
So that's
a lot of material there.
There's a lot of material there, and it's something that, like, people have found hilarious, and I'm just telling them to just leave me alone, basically, and they're not listening. And but they find.
I mean, I've had somebody message me on Facebook, like, "Hey, do you want to be in an adult film?" I'm like,
yeah. See,
why
it
why is that acceptable?
Right? It doesn't even have to show up in, like, online dating websites. It's just more prevalent there because that's kind of where. Yeah. But we also deal with this in our own social circles, and just, like, in our places where we're trying to be with our friends and our family. I mean, that's what I use Facebook for. And it's like, okay, yeah, you can come into my space when I invite you. Why are you just jumping in with that?
Yeah.
So,
that dang keyboard anonymity.
So
anonymity.
Yeah.
You know what I'm trying to say.
There's this whole series of, like, videos that I have.
Anonymity.
Anemones. Anemones. Yeah. It's just, and it's really, a lot of what I do is kind of, like, think about ways that I can help bring laughter to those who have been wronged. So I know that I have found a lot of empowerment in this, and being able to do this character and create this character and build her up and kind of, like, flesh her out and figure out, okay, so what would she do in this situation? What would she do in this situation? And it's basically become, like, a satire thing. It's like, what would she say about what's going on right now? And how would she react to the things that are happening in our world and that are happening in our country? And how can I, like, create that in a way that helps to bring laughter back to those of us that are struggling so hard underneath the weight of it all?
Right. That's really dope. I'm not surprised to hear you're compiling a book, because I'm like, she's doing all this. She's doing an awful lot of research for a burlesque performance. Like, I imagine at a Renaissance, or not at any type of fair, there's only so much information you can
give. Yeah, but it's a subject that I'm passionate about. It's a subject that so my character name Cleona actually came from some of the Irish mythology, and it's what happened was I was talking about the mermaid stuff and how I needed to come up with some sort of, like, pen name or character name, and a friend of mine the next day sends me a picture of a book she's reading about this mythological character named Cleona, who's known for luring men to the sea and drowning them.
You're like, perfect.
Perfect, right? I did do some research beforehand to kind of get more of an idea, but like when I did the initial like search, I didn't find the information I was looking for. It wasn't until 6 months later that I was able to find her actual stories and kind of like fully grasp who Cleona actually is. She's so within the Irish mythologies, there's the gods, and then there's also the Fae, and they're two different. The Tuatha De Danann are very different than the Fae. However, within those stories, because of the way that the Irish kept their culture and kept those stories and held on to those stories, Cleona is one of those who she was started out as one of a sovereignty goddess of, and the sovereignty goddesses within the Irish were basically kind of the keepers of the lands, and they held the rulers, the kings, to tasks. The kings, they had to their job, they took oaths to the land, and if things started going, if they would not, they had sovereignty is a huge deal within the Irish mythologies, and it's about personal choice. It's about taking care of the land and not ruling the land, and taking the oaths to that land to take care of it and not like use it for personal gain. And not destroy it. So she started out as that, but as time went on, she stayed in the stories and also became a fairy queen as well. So she's known, like, within her actual mythologies. This actually made me laugh because one of the main things that I do is the Renaissance fairs. And in her actual stories, she's known for going to the Renaissance fairs to entice men. Well, not necessarily the Renaissance fairs, just like the fairs, like the gathering places that they would have in Ireland. And, like, but they, like, within the 1930s iteration of this, she was known for wandering around the fairs and enticing men. And she also has like this really empowering, kind of vengeful story. She's not like within her myth, like she's known for drowning men for one. For two, she turns her sister into a cat because her sister wanted to marry her fell in love with her fiance. So she gives her sister a potion and turns her into and then uses her wand to turn her into a cat and leaves her in a cave. So there's that aspect of it as well. But at one point in her story that really resonated with me and just kind of like ties into that theme. Her son dies, and she blames the father and her husband, and so she takes her 2 daughters with her and she retreats into a rock, and she keeps the daughters.
So with them and rocks. Turning their kids into rocks, they're retreating into rocks.
Yeah, so the rocks are they're landmarks basically. So they created these stories around these landmarks. To tell the stories around these landmarks, and it's actually very common throughout all of Ireland to have specific landmarks and the stories within the landmarks. There's actually a whole entire mythological cycle that is around the different landmarks within Ireland. And they still treat them with respect. I went to Ireland back in a few years ago, and one of the things that really struck me is like kind of just like wow, like there was a dolmen, which is kind of was it a dolmen? I think it was a dolmen. But like we went to one place where they had these standing stones and this ancient structure, and it was surrounded by a golf course.
Oh, wow.
Then there was also Cuchulain's rock that he was tied to when he basically sacrificed himself in his death story. Cuchulain is one of the heroes within the Irish cycles. His stone was sitting in the middle of a potato field. So we went tromping through a potato field to go visit that stone.
Sounds very Irish.
Yes, it is. So yeah, there's a whole entire
So I take it you're Irish?
I don't really I call myself an American mutt. we don't.
Yeah, I have a lot of Irish, but I
Yeah.
know there's also Dutch, Scottish, like all that stuff.
It's something that we try not to like gatekeep on. It's like if you want to actually learn the mythologies and you can connect with it, it's something that has also come and morphed into like there's the Irish diasporas here in America as well, and those cultures that have kind of like kept that part of themselves alive. And it's also making sure that you're respectful about it. And one of the main things that I have done is there is a teacher who is a native Irish person, and Laura O'Brien, and they have been able to, they basically what Laura does is create books and classes and online classes so people can connect to the Irish traditions in an authentic way. And there's a lot of discussions about looking into like trying not to like we don't it doesn't matter if you're Irish if you connect with it then
right
you connect with it.
I'm more asking. I was like, well, you got really bright blue eyes, so she might be Irish.
I think that there's some Irish in there. There's some English. There's some German. I have no idea. It's
Caucasian.
Yes. Yes.
Now, are you gonna go so far? Because don't they still teach Gaelic like in school?
Yeah.
And stuff
So there's Irish and there's Old Irish. Gaelic is actually the Scottish form of the version.
Okay.
So they do still, so you go to Ireland and you'll see the English and you'll see the Irish. So they do still teach that, and they do have, like, you can go on Duolingo and you can learn from there. Rosetta has some programs as well.
Nice.
That you can learn the language and learn the actual words in the Gaeilge.
I learned that through comments on a YouTube video one time.
Yeah.
Because they were talking about doing their Irish homework.
Yeah.
We're like, what the heck is Irish homework? I didn't know they had I mean, I know their accent can be heavy, but I didn't realize there was actually an entirely different language that they spoke as well.
Yeah. So, and that's actually, so one of the things that the Irish people have dealt with is the colonialism and the English coming in and saying, no, you can't speak this language anymore. This is not okay for you to speak, and having to, and I know with the Scottish Gaelic as well, there was a period of time where it just, you didn't speak it. So I know that in Ireland, they're trying to like keep that alive and keep those cultures alive, and especially with like the independence that they fought hard for, so that they could basically break away from the UK and the British rule.
Brexit. Everybody thought that was crazy, but
yeah,
if it makes sense for them, it makes sense for them. Well, oh, I did want you were telling me about the cave.
Oh, yes, the cave. Okay, so, and I am going to have to apologize if I pronounce this wrong, because I'm probably pronouncing it wrong.
No worries.
But the Sioclavina cave is a cave in Transylvania, and my friend shared an article about it recently. And the article was basically talking about how back in the 1950s, they found a bunch of beads and jewelry and things that were left there, as well as skulls and different animal skulls. And it was talking about how they've gone back and they've carbon dated these things, and they found that these things have been left there over a very long period of time. And the cave is not an easy cave to get to. It's not a safe cave to go to. And
yes, you had mentioned Death Trap before.
When I was reading about like kind of how the cave functions, that it was like, yep, it's a death trap. It's a death trap at some points in the year. But so they've carbon dated it, and so that lends evidence that it was a sacred place where people went to offer offerings, and those items were left as offerings for some sort of spirit for the local people that lived there.
Right.
So after reading that article, and the article actually made the connection for that cave to nymphs, because there's like within the Odyssey, you have stories of the nymphs being associated with caves and rivers and that kind of thing. And that got me thinking, because nymphs are Greek, they're not necessarily they're not your Transylvanian, Romanian mythology.
Yeah.
So it seemed kind of like a thready like connection for me, because of the fact that they were using Greek mythology to do this. So I started looking, recently spent a few hours kind of going down a rabbit hole and of folklore. And basically the cave itself is the source of the Sioclavina River. So it's the source point for this river. And if you think about rivers bring life, because they bring the water that you need to farm, to live, to basically make things grow. To sustain the life. But part of that cave also serves as a collection point for the snowmelt in the summer, in the springtime. So when the snowmelt starts collecting, it basically turns into this raging death trap. And if you go and visit it during the dry months, you'll see kind of like the destruction that it's caused, because there will be dead animals or dead trees that have gotten caught up in there.
Right. Such a quick and forceful.
So it's a very quick and forceful thing. And then it also, I mean, if it goes too far, it can flood. So it would make sense that the people of the land that lived there would go to leave offerings for the spirits there, as a way of saying, thank you for the water, please don't kill us.
Right.
In kind of like a short, simple way. But so I started doing some digging into like the Romanian mythologies, and I came across this creature, this group of creatures that their name is Iele, I-E-L-E, and it translates. It basically translates into the Romanian female version of they. Okay. So they don't actually have like a name; they're just called they. But they were these river creatures that could also they were vengeful. So you didn't want to cross them because they could harm you.
Right.
And they have, looking at their lore, there's a lot of connection, like similarities between their lore and the nymph lore. And I'm just barely started digging into them, but it was one of those things that...
Have you ever read American Gods? Neil Gaiman's American Gods?
Yeah.
I feel like that might be where I heard that name before. Because there's so many different mythologies within that.
He did a good job with that. He did a good job with like kind of that like
digging deep
into it's very, very popular among those of my friends who like mythology. So
I've always been interested in basically any mythology, because like you mentioned earlier, it's I feel like it's a real introspective look to how people saw the world, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And even if they're not true, there's a lot of things we can learn from it.
Exactly.
But then they have mermaid stories all over the world, so there might be mermaids. Who knows? You know?
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's also, like, not even just mermaids, there's also different deities that are associated with them. Yemayaya, she's one of the Orisha. And I may or may not be pronouncing that right, but she's basically in the oceans, and she pulls the souls down with her deep into the ocean. Mm-hmm. So she's got that water and death aspect
as well.
Well.
And is she Irish?
No, she's actually one of the Orishas. So that's Santeria.
Okay.
Yeah, it's I haven't been able to dig much more into that beyond people mentioning her to me. Mm-hmm. But she's on my list of things to kind of dig deep into and talk to people about and get their experiences and get the actual lore out there.
Right.
Because they're and it's in doing it in a respectful way, because there are people that still work with her and still worship her, and she's a very, very living part of these cultures still, and will continue to be as well.
Um, that's awesome. And I know the Irish are another that there's a lot, maybe not a lot of people, but there are still some people there who very heavily believe all the mythologies and whatnot.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Now banshees, are those Irish?
Yes, yes. So
Okay.
and Cleona, in part of her mythology and part of her one of her aspects is Queen of the Banshees, actually. So
Oh, nice.
yeah, banshees are Irish. There's some Scottish versions of them as well. There's the Cuineg, who is known to reside in like rivers and water, and they are very similar in that if you hear their scream, there's like death coming. It's, but yes, the banshees are Irish. They are they do have screaming, and then also what's interesting is there is a practice called keening within the Irish traditions,
Okay.
which is basically singing over the body to help them pass over to the spirit world and help them like make that transition in
Right.
death, in that transition.
Right.
It's just,
Is that something that's still practiced?
yes, I do know of some keeners. I do know that there are practices in Ireland. There was a recording that I heard from like the early 1900s of a keening woman. And she only did it, she didn't do like a full keening, but she's like, okay, I can show you what it's like. But the people that I've talked to that do it, it's very emotion based, and it's not something you can just
Do on the spot.
On the spot.
Right.
So,
Makes sense.
Yeah.
You're
So
singing
there's,
to a soul to
yeah,
pass on. or to
yeah.
pass
So
on.
it's kind of one of those things where they have both, like there's that actual ritual practice kind of tied into that myth with the banshees.
Right. Yeah, mythology is. I guess it makes sense. There's literally thousands of years.
Yeah,
of
there's
it
thousands of years. There's thousands of cultures. It's wide and it's far spreading, and like I actually only consider myself like a beginner in the mythology because there's people who spend their entire lives researching this stuff and
Right.
like looking into it and writing about it. And
Somebody commented that mythology was the first sociology. It was an early
Yeah.
form of sociology.
yeah,
Could see that.
I could see that as well.
Was there anything else that you wanted to mention before we wrap it up?
No, I think
Got a lot.
we got a lot
Got a lot out there.
out there.
Be on the lookout for her book in the next couple years. And then again, October 19th, there is a free burlesque show with fire, guys, at the Whiskey Barrel with her and the Bungaloo Bunnies. So make sure to step on out that night and check that out. And then October 27th, if you're in Sonora, check out the All Hallows Fantasy Fair. She will be there as well. October 27th, shout out to Lodi Zombie Walk as well, if you're in that area. And if you're here in Stockton, we have the function going on. There's a lot of stuff going on October 27th. So you have no excuse not to do something.
Yeah.
Again, Adrienne, thank you so much for
You're
coming
very welcome.
on. I love.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. I love that you're more than just a pretty face when it comes to mermaids. It actually
Yeah.
has knowledge behind it as well.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that you're incorporating our youth and, you know what I mean, education as well.
Education. It's about empowerment. It's about helping people remember the past and also find ways to look towards their future.
Right. Yeah, and I think people don't realize, like, there's nothing new under the sun. All these emotional problems that we're having, they had back in the day too.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So when you can kind of make that connection, like, it's not the end of the world because people have been going through this for 5,000 years
Yeah.
or, you know, however,
Yeah,
tens
yeah.
of thousands of years. Yeah, I think that is very empowering. So once again, or actually, before we go, almost forgot, I like to end the show with reading horoscopes.
Okay.
So what is your sign?
I am a Pisces.
Oh, I'm a Pisces too. That makes that easy. That also makes the mermaid way more fitting as well. You're already a fish.
I am. I grew up swimming all the time. It's easy transition.
Right. Okay, so Pisces, October 1st. This whole Lone Ranger act must stop. It's time to integrate yourself back into the lives of the people around you. The ideal opportunity to do this is coming into your life right now, so take advantage of it. Ask for help, ideas, and opinions from the people you've distanced yourself from. Showing them that you value what they have to say will solidify your relationships and encourage the forces around you to help you get back on track. You'll be headed in the right direction before you know it.
All right. Sounds good.
Sounds good. All right, guys. Well, again, thanks for tuning in with me and Adrian Street. This was Rise and Shine 209 on the voice of Stockton, KXVS. And tune in again with me tomorrow, same time, same place. All right. Put some music on for y'all, and then we can bounce.
The nation will rise up, live out the true meaning of its creed, that all men are created equal.
Yeah, fist in the air, screaming power to the people. Love that, brother, we're supposed to be equal. But it feels like I'm living in the sequel, cause it's 2016 and they still killing my people. 400 years of slavery, preparing for a part. You'll be back with more killings just shortly after the preview. The is on repeat, but I ain't talking about the TV. I'm talking about the same attack that's coming from the intermediate hunger in the trees. Now they kill us in the streets. They used to wear sheets, now they dress like police. And I ain't scared to go to